Starvation had carved her children's faces into skeletal masks, driving Mary to her knees before the Apache warrior with an offer that burned her throat like acid. Her body, her freedom, her very existence in exchange for their survival. As she whispered, "I'll be yours forever if you feed them," she couldn't know this desperate bargain would forge an impossible love in a land that demanded they remain enemies. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Arizona Territory, summer of 1871. The merciless sun descended slowly over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the abandoned streets of Copper Creek. The once bustling mining town now stood eerily silent, its wooden structures weathered and creaking in the hot desert wind. Dust swirled in small eddies, dancing between the empty buildings like restless spirits. Mary Henderson sat on the warped steps of what had once been the general store, her cotton dress stained with dirt and sweat, clinging to her thin frame. Her hands, once soft and delicate, were now cracked and raw. She twisted a simple gold band on her finger, the last reminder of Thomas, taken by fever 6 months before they'd even reached the Arizona Territory. The dreams they'd shared of a new beginning had died with him, leaving her alone with 3 children and dwindling hope. Inside the abandoned store, 8-year-old James lay on a makeshift bed of tattered blankets, his eyes sunken and dull as he watched over his younger siblings. 6-year-old Emma curled against him, her small body shivering despite the heat. The youngest, 4-year-old William, had finally fallen into a restless sleep, his whimpers for food having faded into exhaustion. 3 days. 3 days since the bandits had descended on their wagon like vultures, taking everything: their horse, their supplies, the last of their food. 3 days of searching the abandoned town for anything edible, finding nothing but dust and disappointment. "Mama?" James's voice drifted weakly through the doorway. Is there anything?" Mary swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. "Rest now, James. I'll find something soon." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She stared out at the desolate street, the setting sun painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold. Such beauty and such cruelty, she thought. The landscape that had promised them a future was slowly becoming their grave. A distant sound broke the oppressive silence, the rhythmic thudding of hoofbeats growing steadily louder. Mary's heart leapt into her throat as she squinted against the dying sunlight. A lone rider approached, his silhouette dark against the blazing sky. As he drew closer, Mary felt fear seize her chest. The rider's long hair was adorned with feathers, his copper skin marked with symbols she didn't understand. An Apache warrior, astride a magnificent painted horse, moved with the confidence of one who knew this land as intimately as his own heartbeat. Stories whispered around campfires during their journey west flooded her mind. Tales of savage raids, of settlers found with their scalps removed. But these thoughts were quickly swept away by a more immediate concern. Her children were starving. The warrior slowed his horse, dark eyes scanning the ghost town warily before coming to rest on Mary. He wore no war paint, she noticed, and carried only a knife and what appeared to be a small bundle of provisions. Their eyes met across the dusty street, his guarded and assessing, hers desperate and afraid. In that moment, Mary made her choice. With trembling legs, she rose and stepped into the street, raising her hands to show she carried no weapon. The warrior tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his knife. "Please," she called, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. "My children, they haven't eaten in 3 days." The warrior's expression remained impassive, though his gaze flickered briefly toward the store where the children lay. Mary fell to her knees in the dirt, pride abandoned in the face of maternal desperation. "I'll be yours forever if you feed them," she whispered, tears finally spilling down her dust-streaked cheeks. "Whatever you want from me, Just help them, please." The warrior dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements silent and graceful. He approached cautiously, stopping several paces away. His face revealed nothing, but something in his eyes shifted as he looked at her. Recognition, perhaps, of a pain that transcended language and culture. For what seemed an eternity, they remained frozen in this tableau. The desperate mother kneeling in the dirt, the solitary warrior standing before her, and the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air between them. The warrior's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, dark as night and just as deep, studied Mary with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She remained kneeling, heart hammering against her ribs, the taste of fear metallic on her tongue. He spoke a single word in his native language, then switched to halting English. "Stand." His voice was surprisingly gentle, like water over stone. Mary rose on shaky legs, keeping her eyes downcast in submission. To her surprise, the warrior reached into his bundle and withdrew a small pouch of dried meat. He extended it toward her without ceremony. "Take," he said simply. Mary stared at the offering, disbelieving. When she reached for it, her fingers brushed against his, and she was struck by the unexpected warmth of his skin. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the pouch to her chest like a sacred object. The warrior nodded once, then gestured toward the store. "Children." Mary led him to the ramshackle building, her mind racing. This man could kill them all with ease, yet something in his manner suggested no threat. As they entered, James sat up protectively, placing himself between the stranger and his siblings despite his weakened state. "It's all right," Mary said softly, kneeling beside her children. "He's brought food." The warrior remained by the doorway, observing silently as Mary divided the dried meat into small portions. Emma reached eagerly for her share, while William watched with wide, uncertain eyes, looking between his mother and the imposing figure at the entrance. "Slowly now," Mary cautioned as the children began to eat. "Small bites, small." The warrior's gaze lingered on the children, and something flickered across his face, a shadow of emotion quickly mastered. He spoke again, this time a longer phrase in Apache, then touched his chest. "Kuruk." Mary understood. "Your name is Kuruk?" He nodded, then pointed at her questioningly. "Mary," she replied. "Mary Henderson. These are my children, James, Emma, and William." Kuruk's eyes moved around the abandoned store, taking in their meager belongings, the absence of supplies. "Bad men," he stated rather than asked, making a gesture that Mary interpreted as robbery. "Yes," she confirmed. 3 days ago, they took everything." Kuruk stepped outside without explanation. Mary followed anxiously to the doorway, fearing he might leave, but he was merely retrieving something from his horse. He returned with a water skin and a bundle wrapped in animal hide. "Water," he said, offering the skin. "Food." He placed the bundle on the floor. Mary accepted both with trembling hands. "Why are you helping us?" Kuruk was silent for so long that Mary thought he hadn't understood. Then he spoke, his voice low and tinged with an emotion she couldn't name. "I had wife, child." His hand made a sweeping motion, then fell to his side. "No more." Understanding dawned in Mary's eyes. "They're gone," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Kuruk turned away, moving toward the door. "Rest now. Tomorrow, I show you plants, water." He pointed westward. "Settlement, 2 days' ride." He indicated his horse. "You walk 4 days." "You're leaving?" Mary couldn't keep the panic from her voice. Kuruk shook his head. "Sleep now. Return morning." After he departed, Mary sat beside her children, watching them eat with a mother's relief. James looked up at her, his young face serious. "Can we trust him, Mama?" Mary stared at the doorway where Kuruk had stood. "We have little choice," she replied honestly. "But I believe we can." Outside, as darkness enveloped the ghost town, Kuruk made camp on the outskirts. He built a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows across his weathered face. His thoughts turned to another time, another place, to Nitika, his wife, singing their son to sleep under stars that now seemed cold and distant. He remembered the soldiers coming at dawn, the screams, the gunfire, the smoke rising from their village. He remembered cradling his son's lifeless body, Nitika lying still beside them, her blood soaking into the earth. 3 moons had passed since that day. 3 moons of drifting like a ghost through lands that no longer felt like home, avoiding both his own people and the white settlers, carrying his grief like a stone in his chest. Yet today, something had stirred within him at the sight of this white woman kneeling in the dust, offering herself for her children. There had been no fear in her eyes, only the fierce, desperate love of a mother. It reminded him of Nitika, of how she would have done anything to protect their son. Kuruk tossed a stick into the fire, watching as sparks spiraled upward toward the star-filled sky. The spirits had placed this woman and her children in his path for a reason, perhaps to remind him that life continued even after great loss, perhaps to give him purpose when he had none. Tomorrow he would show them how to survive in this harsh land. Then he would guide them to safety. After that, he did not know. Dawn broke over Copper Creek in a wash of pale gold. Mary awoke to find Emma and William curled against her, their breathing deep and steady for the first time in days. James sat in the doorway, keeping watch with a vigilance no child his age should possess. "Has he returned?" Mary asked, gently extricating herself from her sleeping children. James shook his head. "Not yet, Mama." Mary smoothed her tattered dress and ran fingers through her tangled hair, a futile attempt at dignity. She still couldn't believe what she had done, offering herself to a stranger, an Apache no less. The desperation that had driven her to such extremes left a bitter taste, yet she couldn't deny the man's unexpected kindness. A movement at the edge of town caught her attention. Kuruk approached on foot, leading his horse, the animal's coat gleaming copper in the morning light. He carried something in his hands, green plants with bulbous roots. "Good," he said, seeing the children awake and alert. "We go now. Learn." Mary hesitated. "Where are you taking us?" Kuruk gestured to the desert beyond the town. "Plants, water, you must know." Understanding dawned on her. He wasn't merely giving them food, he was going to teach them how to find it themselves. Mary nodded, gathering her children and the few possessions they had left. They walked in silence, Kuruk leading his horse, the children trailing behind Mary like ducklings. The desert, which had seemed so barren and hostile, began to transform under Kuruk's guidance. He stopped beside a small, unremarkable cactus, its green flesh blending with the sparse vegetation. "Agua," he said, drawing his knife. With expert precision, he sliced open the plant, revealing moist pulp inside. "Drink." Mary watched as he demonstrated, then tentatively tasted the bitter flesh. The moisture was minimal but refreshing. She helped her children do the same, smiling at William's grimace of disgust. "Not sweet," Kuruk acknowledged with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "But life." Throughout the morning, Kuruk introduced them to plants Mary would have passed without a second glance. Tubers buried beneath seemingly dead shrubs, berries hidden among thorny branches, leaves that could be chewed for water. He showed them how to recognize snake tracks in the sand and which insects were safe to eat if truly desperate. Emma, initially shy, now followed Kuruk closely, mimicking his movements with solemn concentration. William remained wary, clinging to Mary's skirts. Only James maintained a guarded distance, watching the Apache with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. "Why do you help us?" James finally asked, as they rested in the shade of a rocky outcrop. "Aren't your people at war with ours?" Kuruk regarded the boy thoughtfully. "Not my war," he replied. "Not your war, just people." He paused, searching for words. Hunger, pain, same in any language. Mary studied Kuruk as he spoke to her son. In the clear light of day, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 at most. His face bore scars that spoke of battles fought, and his eyes held a depth of sorrow that resonated with her own grief. As they continued their journey, Mary found herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands that pointed out tracks in the dirt, that demonstrated how to extract water from plant roots, that gently steadied Emma when she stumbled on loose stones. These were not the hands of the savage she had been warned about. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Kuruk led them to a small canyon where a trickle of water seeped from the rocks, forming a shallow pool. The children's faces lit up at the sight. "Drink slow," Kuruk cautioned. "Little sips." As the children refreshed themselves, Mary turned to Kuruk. "I don't understand. Your people and mine, the stories I've heard." "Stories," he repeated, the word heavy with meaning. "Your people have stories of mine. Mine have stories of yours." He looked toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. "All stories have truth. All stories have lies." Mary considered his words. How many tales had she accepted without question? How many fears had she harbored based on second-hand accounts? "My husband," she said suddenly, not sure why she was sharing this. "Thomas. He died before we reached Arizona. Fever took him." She twisted the gold band on her finger. "He was a good man. Wanted to build something new for our children." Kuruk nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My wife, Nitika," he offered in return, the name spoken with reverence. "Soldiers came. Many died." His voice remained steady, but Mary saw his hand tighten on his knife hilt. "My son also." The simple words carried such weight that Mary felt tears spring to her eyes. This man, whom she had been taught to fear, had lost everything, just as she feared losing her own children. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Kuruk met her gaze directly for the first time. "Life continues," he said simply, "even when we wish it would not." As afternoon faded into evening, they returned to Copper Creek to gather their meager belongings. Kuruk built a small fire outside the abandoned store, producing a rabbit he had caught and prepared during his morning hunt before finding Mary and the children. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, causing William's eyes to widen with hunger. Even James edged closer, his wariness temporarily forgotten in the face of such bounty. "Tomorrow," Kuruk announced as they ate, "we start journey. 4 sons to settlement." He looked at the children, assessing their strength. "Little ones cannot walk so far." Mary nodded, concern creasing her brow. "Emma and William won't manage the distance, especially in this heat." Kuruk considered this problem, then spoke. "Horse carries small ones. You and oldest boy walk with me." He traced a route in the dirt with his finger. "Follow riverbed. Dry now, but shade from banks. Less heat." "Thank you," Mary said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "I don't know how we'll repay your kindness." Kuruk shook his head. "No payment." His eyes reflected the dancing flames. "The Great Spirit places people in our path. We choose to help or not. Today, I choose." Later, as the children slept, Mary sat beside the dying fire, watching Kuruk sharpen his knife with smooth, practiced motions. Questions burned within her, but she hesitated to disturb the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Ask," he said without looking up, as if sensing her thoughts. Mary drew her knees to her chest. "Why were you alone? Where is your tribe?" Kuruk's hands stilled. "After," he began, then paused. "After soldiers, I leave tribe. cannot bear memories, cannot bear pity. He resumed his sharpening, the rhythmic scrape filling the silence. I become scout, watch soldier movements, tell chiefs where army goes. Isn't that dangerous? Mary asked, though she already knew the answer. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Less dangerous than sitting in village waiting for soldiers. Mary found herself returning his smile, surprising herself. When was the last time she had smiled? Before Thomas fell ill, certainly. Before their dreams turned to dust. Your husband, Kuruk said, breaking into her thoughts. He was good man. Yes, Mary answered softly. Kind, hard-working, he believed in a better life out west. She gestured at their surroundings with a hollow laugh. This wasn't quite what he imagined. Kuruk nodded thoughtfully. Dreams sometimes lead to hard places. The simple truth of his words struck Mary deeply. They fell silent again, but it was a companionable silence, broken only by the occasional pop of the embers and the distant call of a nightbird. Morning came with a breathtaking swiftness, the desert transforming from cool blue shadows to blazing gold in what seemed like moments. They set out as planned. Emma and William perched atop Kuruk's patient horse, while Mary and James walked alongside. Kuruk led them away from the ghost town, following the dried riverbed as he had indicated. The journey was arduous despite Kuruk's careful planning. The sun beat down relentlessly, and even in the shade of the riverbanks, the heat was oppressive. William whimpered occasionally, and Emma grew quiet and listless. James trudged forward stubbornly, refusing Mary's offers to take turns riding the horse. Kuruk moved with tireless efficiency, stopping regularly to ensure everyone drank water and ate small amounts of the provisions he carried. He showed James how to wrap cloth around his head to keep cool and demonstrated to Mary how to recognize which rocks might shelter scorpions or snakes. By midday, they had made good progress, but Mary noticed storm clouds gathering on the distant horizon. "Should we be concerned?" she asked, nodding toward the darkening sky. Kuruk's face grew serious. "Desert storms come fast. Much danger." He surveyed their surroundings, then pointed to a cluster of rocky formations ahead. "We find shelter there." They quickened their pace as the wind began to rise, carrying the scent of rain. The distant rumble of thunder made the horse skittish, and Kuruk spoke to it in soothing tones, stroking its neck. They had nearly reached the rocks when the first fat droplets began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle rain transformed into a torrential downpour. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by deafening thunder. "Hurry!" Kuruk shouted above the storm's roar. He lifted William and Emma from the horse and handed them to Mary. "Into caves! Now!" Mary grabbed her children and rushed toward the shelter of a shallow cave in the rock face. James followed closely behind. Kuruk remained outside, struggling to calm his frightened horse. A sudden, terrible crashing sound drew Mary's attention to the riverbed they had been following. Water, muddy and debris-filled, surged down the previously dry channel, growing in volume with terrifying speed. "Kuruk!" she screamed, seeing the flash flood rushing toward him. The Apache had secured his horse to a sturdy outcrop, but now found himself cut off from the cave by the rapidly rising water. Without hesitation, he began scaling the steep rock face, seeking an alternate route to safety. Mary watched in horror as he climbed, the rain making the rocks treacherously slick. Halfway up, his foot slipped, and he barely caught himself on a narrow ledge. "Stay back!" he called to Mary, who had instinctively moved to the cave entrance. "Children, stay here," she commanded, then stepped out into the driving rain. The water had risen to her ankles already, its pull strong enough to make her footing uncertain. "Go back!" Kuruk shouted, but Mary ignored him, making her way carefully along the rock face until she stood beneath his precarious position. "Jump down," she called up to him. "I'll help you." Their eyes met through the curtain of rain, his filled with surprise, hers with determined resolve. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of equal courage, of mutual respect. Kuruk nodded once, then pushed off from the ledge, landing beside her with controlled grace, despite the dangerous conditions. Together, they fought against the rising water to reach the cave, collapsing inside just as a surge of floodwater swept past their shelter. Inside, soaked and breathless, they looked at each other. Mary's hand rested on Kuruk's arm, and neither moved to break the contact. "Foolish," he said at last, but there was no anger in his voice, only a puzzled wonder. "You would have done the same," Mary replied simply. The storm raged through the afternoon, trapping them in the shallow cave as water continued to rush through the riverbed below. The children huddled together on the driest spot they could find, while Mary wrung out her sodden dress as best she could. Kuruk stood at the entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the grey curtain of rain. "How long will it last?" Mary asked, moving to stand beside him. "Hard to say. Desert storms. Unpredictable." He glanced at her, noting how she shivered despite the lingering heat. Without comment, he removed his leather vest and draped it over her shoulders. "Oh, I couldn't," she began. "Take," he said simply. "I am used to elements." Mary accepted the unexpected gift, wrapping the garment around her. It carried his scent, leather, smoke, and something distinctly wild like sage after rainfall. "Thank you," she murmured. As daylight began to fade, Kuruk managed to gather enough dry wood from the back of the cave to build a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock walls as they huddled around its warmth. William had fallen asleep in Mary's lap, his small hand curled trustingly around her finger. Emma sat nearby, braiding and unbraiding a section of her hair with mechanical precision, a habit she'd developed after Thomas died. James, however, remained alert, watching Kuruk with an intensity that had shifted from suspicion to curiosity. "How did you learn to survive out here?" he finally asked. Kuruk looked up from where he was carving something from a small piece of wood. "From my father, and his father before him." He handed the carved object to James, a small wolf, rough but recognizable. "My people live with the land, not against it. The desert provides if you know how to listen." James turned the wooden figure over in his hands. "My pa was teaching me things too, before he died." His voice faltered. He was going to show me how to build a proper house, how to hunt. Mary watched this exchange with a tightness in her throat. It was the first time since Thomas's death that James had spoken of him without anger shadowing his young face. Kuruk nodded solemnly. "A son should learn from his father." He seemed to consider something, then continued, "Until you reach the settlement, I can teach some things, if you wish." James looked at his mother, a question in his eyes. Mary nodded encouragement, though her heart ached at the thought that soon their paths would diverge. The storm finally subsided around midnight, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The formerly parched earth now glistened with standing water, and the air felt unusually humid. Dawn revealed that the flash flood had altered their planned route, washing away sections of the riverbank and depositing debris that would be difficult to navigate. "We must find new path," Kuruk announced after scouting the area. Flood changed everything. They set out cautiously, Kuruk leading his horse with Emma and William aboard once again. The going was treacherous, mud sucked at their boots, and twice Mary nearly lost her footing on the slippery ground. By midday, they had made frustratingly little progress. The children were hungry and irritable, their initial relief at the cooler post-storm temperatures giving way to complaints about wet clothes and muddy conditions. As they paused to rest beneath the spreading branches of a mesquite tree, Mary noticed Kuruk growing increasingly alert, his gaze scanning the horizon with focused intensity. "What is it?" she asked softly, not wanting to alarm the children. "Tracks," he replied, his voice equally low. "Men on horseback. 4, maybe 5. Mary's heart quickened. "The bandits who robbed us?" "Perhaps, or soldiers. Neither would be good. His expression darkened. Soldiers hunt me, bandits hunt you. What should we do? Kuruk considered their options. Cannot outrun on foot, cannot hide tracks in mud. His eyes met hers, their dark depths reflecting difficult choices. Must change direction, head into hills. He pointed toward a rugged range of mountains to the west. Harder journey, longer, but safer. Mary looked at her exhausted children, then back at the forbidding mountains. Will we still reach the settlement? Eventually. Different path, same destination. Kuruk's hand moved almost unconsciously to the knife at his belt. But first, we must avoid those who follow. As they prepared to change course, James approached Kuruk hesitantly. Are we in danger? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. Kuruk placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, the first time he had initiated such contact. Yes, he answered honestly, but I will teach you to be strong, like your father would. James straightened, squaring his narrow shoulders. I can help protect my family. Something like pride flickered across Kuruk's weathered features. Yes, you can. Mary watched this exchange with a complex emotion she couldn't name. In the space of just 2 days, this man, this stranger from a world so different from her own, had become their protector, their teacher, their lifeline, and perhaps something more. The mountainous terrain proved as unforgiving as it had appeared from a distance. Loose shale slid beneath their feet as they climbed, making each step treacherous. The horse struggled on the steeper inclines, forcing Kuruk to lead it carefully along narrow game trails that snaked across the rocky slopes. They stopped frequently for the children's sake, though Mary noticed that William complained less now, his eyes wide with adventure rather than glassy with hunger. Emma had taken to collecting small, colorful stones along the way, storing them carefully in a pouch Kuruk had fashioned from a scrap of leather. James stayed close to Kuruk, absorbing everything the Apache showed him, how to recognize mountain sheep tracks, which plants grew at this elevation, how to gauge direction by the sun. The boy's transformation from sullen wariness to eager apprentice had been swift and complete. Near dusk, they reached a small plateau that offered both shelter and visibility. Kuruk gestured for them to stop, pointing to a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. Camp here. Hidden, but we can see approaches. As Mary settled the younger children, Kuruk took James aside and showed him how to arrange stones in a circle for a fire pit. Small flame only, he instructed. Too much smoke draws attention. While they worked, Mary found herself watching Kuruk's hands, strong, capable hands that moved with purpose and precision. She caught herself wondering how those hands might feel against her cheek, and the thought brought heat rising to her face. She turned away quickly, ashamed of her wandering mind. They're still following, Kuruk announced, as they shared a meager dinner of jerky and wild onions he had gathered along the way. Saw dust rising in valley. 4 riders. Mary's stomach tightened with anxiety. Who do you think they are? Cannot be certain. His expression was grim. But they follow our old tracks with purpose. What will we do if they find us? James asked, his voice admirably steady. Kuruk considered the boy thoughtfully. First, we avoid. Second, we hide. He touched the knife at his belt. Fighting is last choice, when no others remain. Mary couldn't help but compare this philosophy to the bravado of many white men she had known, who seemed to consider violence their first and most natural response to conflict. Thomas had not been like that. He had been gentle, cautious, but he had also been unprepared for the harsh realities of frontier life. As if reading her thoughts, Kuruk spoke again. Your husband, he was not a fighter. No, Mary admitted, he was a carpenter. He built things, he healed things. She smiled sadly. He was ill-suited for this land, I think. Not all strength is in fighting, Kuruk replied. Building requires different strength. both valuable. His words brought unexpected comfort. Mary had spent months wondering if Thomas's gentleness had been a fatal weakness, if a harder man might have survived. But Kuruk's perspective offered another view, that different kinds of strength existed, each with its own value. As darkness fell, Kuruk instructed them to sleep while he kept watch. Mary protested, concerned about his own need for rest, but he was insistent. "I will wake you if danger comes," he promised, then moved to a position where he could survey the valley below. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Mary. The children's soft breathing and the occasional call of a nightbird were the only sounds disturbing the profound silence of the mountains. After an hour of restless turning, she rose quietly and made her way to where Kuruk sat, his back straight, his profile sharp against the star-filled sky. He acknowledged her presence with a slight nod, but didn't speak. Mary settled beside him, drawing her knees to her chest. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier," she ventured after a moment, "about different kinds of strength." He remained focused on the darkened landscape. "Before all this, I never thought of myself as strong," she continued. "I was just Thomas's wife, the children's mother. When he died," her voice caught, "I thought I would break apart." Kuruk finally turned to look at her. "But you did not." "No." Mary realized the truth of it as she spoke. "I didn't. I kept going." "Mother strength," he said simply, "fierce as any warriors." They sat in companionable silence, the vast expanse of stars wheeling slowly overhead. Mary found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body in the cool mountain air. "You should sleep," he said eventually, his voice low. "So should you." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I am accustomed to night watches." Mary started to rise, then hesitated. "Kuruk, when we reach the settlement, what will you do?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "Return to my duties," he said finally. "Continue scouting, warning my people of soldier movements. A dangerous life." He shrugged. "The path chosen for me. And if you could choose another path?" The question escaped before Mary could consider its implications. Kuruk's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. The moment stretched between them, heavy with words unspoken. Then a sound from below, the distant snort of a horse, broke the spell. Kuruk was instantly alert, scanning the valley with renewed intensity. "They camp below," he whispered, "closer than I thought." Mary's heart raced. "Will they find us? Not tonight, but tomorrow." He frowned, calculating. "We must move before dawn. Use darkness as cover." As if to underscore the precariousness of their situation, a flicker of firelight appeared in the valley, their pursuers making camp. Mary could just make out the silhouettes of men moving around the fire, too distant to identify, but close enough to send fear crawling up her spine. "Go now," Kuruk urged. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow will test us all." Mary returned to her sleeping children, but as she lay down, she found herself looking back at Kuruk's solitary figure. In the silver light of the moon, he appeared both vulnerable and indomitable, a man caught between worlds, just as she was caught between fear and something dangerously close to hope. Tomorrow would indeed test them, not only their strength and cunning against those who pursued them, but also the fragile bond that had begun to form between a grieving white widow and a solitary Apache warrior. A bond neither had sought, but which now seemed as inevitable as the dawn. True to his word, Kuruk roused them while stars still blazed overhead, the moon having set hours before. The darkness was nearly absolute as they gathered their meager belongings in silence. Emma whimpered sleepily, as Mary lifted her onto the horse, but William climbed up behind his sister with surprising agility, his eyes bright despite the early hour. "We go quickly," Curragh whispered, helping James secure a small bundle of provisions. "Stay close, no talking." Mary nodded, her throat tight with anxiety. The distant campfire in the valley had died hours ago, but she could feel the threat of their pursuers like a physical weight. They moved along narrow ledges where a single misstep would mean disaster, Curragh leading them with an uncanny ability to navigate in near-total darkness. Mary kept one hand on the rough stone wall beside her, the other reaching out to steady James when the path grew treacherous. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, they reached a densely wooded section of the mountainside. Curragh halted suddenly, raising one hand in warning. He stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, listening. Then Mary heard it too, the faint jingle of tack, the soft thud of hooves on earth. The sounds came from below but were drawing closer. "They found our trail," Curragh murmured, his expression tightening, moving faster than expected. "What do we do?" Mary asked, instinctively pulling James closer to her side. Curragh assessed their surroundings with swift precision. "I cannot outrun mounted men. Must split up." "Split up?" Mary's heart lurched at the thought. "No, we should stay together." "Listen," Curragh said, his voice urgent but calm. "I take horse, ride east, make obvious trail." He pointed to a rocky outcropping several hundred yards ahead. "You take children there, hide among stones. I lead pursuers away, then circle back." Mary shook her head. "It's too dangerous. What if they catch you?" Something flickered in Curragh's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her concern for his safety. "They will not," he assured her. "I know these mountains. They do not." Before she could protest further, he lifted first Emma, then William from the horse's back, setting them gently on the ground. "Go with Mother now," he told them. "Be brave, be silent." William looked up at Curragh, his small face serious. "Will you come back?" The question seemed to catch Curragh off guard. He crouched down to the boy's level, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes," he said simply, "I will come back." The sincerity in his voice made Mary's eyes burn with unexpected tears. This man, who owed them nothing, was risking his life to protect them. And somehow, in the space of 3 days, he had become someone her children trusted, someone they feared to lose. "Be careful," she whispered as he straightened. Curragh met her gaze, and for a brief, breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then he mounted his horse in one fluid motion and was gone, disappearing through the trees toward the eastern slopes. Mary gathered her children and hurried toward the shelter of the rocks, her mind racing. The outcropping Curragh had indicated formed a natural fortress of stone, with crevices large enough for them to hide in, but too small for grown men to easily follow. "In here," she directed, helping Emma into a narrow opening between two massive boulders. James followed, then William. Mary squeezed in last, pulling a scrubby bush partway across the entrance to conceal it. They huddled together in the dim, cool space, listening to the sounds of the waking forest. Birds began their morning songs, seemingly oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. A gentle breeze rustled through the pines, and then the unmistakable sound of men's voices. Mary held her breath as the voices grew louder. Through a small gap in the rocks, she could see 4 riders moving slowly through the trees, scanning the ground for tracks. Their appearance confirmed her worst fears. These were the same rough-looking men who had robbed them days earlier. "Split up," ordered a burly man with a matted beard who Mary recognized as the leader. "Hawkins, you and Reeves follow that Apache's trail east. Johnson, you're with me. We'll keep looking for the woman and kids. They can't have gone far." The men separated, 2 galloping eastward in pursuit of Curragh, while the leader and his remaining companion continued to search the immediate area. Mary pressed back further into the shadows, clamping a hand over William's mouth when he began to fidget. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun rose fully, sending shafts of light into their hiding place. Emma had fallen asleep against Mary's shoulder, but James remained vigilant, his young face set in determined lines. The men had moved out of sight, but occasional shouts indicated they were still searching nearby. When the sound of a gunshot echoed across the valley, Mary's heart seemed to stop. James's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing tight. "That was far away, Mama," he whispered reassuringly. "East, where Mr. Curragh led them. He's too smart to get caught." Mary nodded, grateful for her son's steady presence, but unable to shake the cold fear that had settled in her chest. What if Curragh had been shot? What if he never returned? How would they find their way to the settlement without him? And beyond these practical concerns lay a deeper, more painful question. How would she bear losing someone else she had come to care for? The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She cared for Curragh, not merely as their rescuer or guide, but as a man whose quiet strength and inherent dignity had awakened feelings she had thought buried alongside Thomas. The guilt was immediate and crushing. Thomas had been dead barely 6 months. Was she so fickle that she could develop feelings for another man so quickly? A man from a completely different world, no less. Lost in her troubled thoughts, Mary almost missed the soft scraping sound at the entrance to their hiding place. James tensed beside her, reaching for a sharp stone he had positioned nearby. Then a familiar voice whispered, "Mary, children." "Curragh!" William cried out, forgetting all caution in his relief. The Apache warrior appeared at the opening, crouching to peer inside. His face was streaked with dirt, and there was a tear in his buckskin leggings. But he appeared otherwise unharmed. "You're safe," Mary breathed, relief washing over her. "For now." He glanced behind him, led 2 men far east, then doubled back, but others still search. "We heard a gunshot," James said. Curragh nodded grimly. "They saw me on ridge, shot missed." He reached out a hand to help Emma, now awake and wide-eyed, out of their rocky shelter. "Must move quickly! Different path now!" As they emerged into the sunlight, Mary found herself suddenly, irrationally angry. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice low enough that the children, already moving ahead under James's guidance, couldn't hear. Curragh looked at her in surprise. "Risk was necessary." "Not to me," she retorted, emotions she couldn't fully understand making her voice shake. "Not if it meant you—" She broke off, unable to complete the thought. Understanding dawned in Curragh's dark eyes. Slowly, with infinite gentleness, he raised his hand to her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized was there. "Mary," he said softly, her name in his mouth sounding like something precious. "I returned, as I promised." The simple statement and the touch of his hand against her cheek undid her completely. Without conscious thought, Mary leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss lasted only a moment, brief, tentative, and yet world-changing. When she pulled back, Curragh was looking at her with an expression of wonder and conflict that surely mirrored her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what exactly she was apologizing for. "Do not be sorry for truth," Curragh replied, his voice rough with emotion. He stepped back, creating necessary distance between them. "But now is not time for such things. First, we reach safety." Mary nodded, gathering her composure. He was right, of course. Their lives were still in danger. The bandits still searched for them. The settlement remained days away. Yet, as they hurried to catch up with the children, something fundamental had shifted between them. A door opened that could not be closed again, revealing a future neither had imagined possible just days before. They traveled in tense silence through the remainder of the morning, climbing higher into the mountains before descending into a narrow valley thick with pine and juniper. Kuruk led them at a grueling pace, stopping only when William began to stumble with fatigue. The horse, recovered during Kuruk's escape from the bandits, now carried both younger children, though Emma occasionally insisted on walking alongside Mary. James had taken position as rear guard, a role Kuruk had assigned him with solemn gravity. The boy took to it with pride, constantly scanning their back trail for signs of pursuit, his face serious beyond his years. By midday, they reached a small stream cutting through the valley floor. Kuruk raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Rest here," he announced. "Eat, drink, then continue." As the children gratefully splashed in the cool water, Mary found herself watching Kuruk with new awareness. The memory of their brief kiss lingered like a physical sensation. She touched her lips unconsciously, then flushed when she caught James observing her with knowing eyes that belonged on someone much older. Kuruk kept his distance, busying himself with checking the horse's hooves and tightening its girth strap. The careful space he maintained between them spoke volumes. When the children were occupied with the small meal Kuruk had prepared, strips of jerky and wild berries gathered along the way, Mary finally approached him, where he crouched by the stream, refilling his water skin. "You've been avoiding me," she said quietly. Kuruk didn't look up. "We must focus on survival." "And after?" The question hung in the air between them. Now he did look at her, his dark eyes troubled. "Mary," he said, her name almost a sigh. "What happened cannot be." The words stung more than she'd expected. "Because I'm white? Because you're Apache?" "Yes." His bluntness was not unkind, merely honest. "My people would not accept you. Your people would despise you." "I don't care what others think," Mary insisted, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The reality of a white woman with an Apache man would scandalize any settlement they encountered. She would be ostracized, her children potentially endangered. Kuruk seemed to read her thoughts. "You care for your children," he reminded her gently. "Their future." Mary fell silent, the truth of his words impossible to deny. The world they inhabited was cruel in its certainties, the lines between their peoples drawn in blood and mistrust. Crossing those lines came with consequences neither could ignore. "It's not fair," she whispered finally, hating how childish the word sounded. A ghost of a smile touched Kuruk's lips. "Life rarely is." He hesitated, then added, "What I feel changes nothing." The acknowledgement that he did feel something made Mary's heart quicken, even as the impossibility of it all threatened to crush her. Before she could respond, James called out from further downstream. "Mr. Kuruk, I found tracks." They both moved quickly to where the boy stood, pointing at distinct impressions in the soft mud along the stream bank. Kuruk crouched, examining them carefully. "Moccasins," he confirmed, his expression grave. "Apache, not mine." Mary's eyes widened. "Your people, yes. War party moving north." He pointed to subtle details in the tracks that Mary couldn't discern. 5, maybe 6 warriors passed here early this morning. "Is that bad for us?" Mary asked hesitantly. Kuruk's face revealed little. "Depends on which band. Some Apache would help us. Others..." He left the thought unfinished. "Could they help against the bandits?" James asked, his young mind already strategizing. "Perhaps. Or they might kill all of us." Kuruk stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Better to avoid. Mary felt cold dread settling in her stomach. They now faced threats from multiple directions, bandits behind, potentially hostile Apache warriors ahead, and the unforgiving wilderness all around them. "We should move," Kuruk decided, gesturing for them to gather their belongings. "Follow stream, but stay under tree cover, less visible." As they prepared to depart, Emma approached Kuruk with a small wildflower in her hand. "For you," she said shyly, offering it to him. "Because you're keeping us safe." Kuruk accepted the simple gift with surprising tenderness, tucking it carefully into a leather pouch at his belt. "Thank you, little one." The moment of sweetness amid their dire circumstances brought unexpected tears to Mary's eyes. This man, whom she had been taught to fear, showed more gentleness toward her children than many white men she had known. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the valley gradually widening as they followed the stream's meandering path. Kuruk kept them moving at a steady pace, though Mary noticed he chose easier routes than before, mindful of the children's endurance. As dusk approached, Kuruk signaled another halt. They had reached a small clearing where the stream pooled into a shallow pond before continuing its journey downward. Tall pines surrounded the area, providing natural shelter and concealment. "Camp here," he announced. "Good water, hidden from view." While Mary helped the children settle, Kuruk disappeared briefly into the forest, returning with 2 rabbits he had somehow managed to catch despite their rapid pace. The prospect of fresh meat lifted everyone's spirits considerably. As darkness fell, they sat around a carefully controlled fire, its flames kept deliberately low to avoid detection. The children, exhausted from the day's journey, fell asleep almost immediately after eating, huddled together beneath a blanket Kuruk had carried in his saddlebags. In the flickering firelight, Mary studied Kuruk's profile as he stared thoughtfully into the flames. The barriers between them seemed both insurmountable and irrelevant, the prejudices of their world meaningless in this moment, yet waiting to reclaim them once they returned to civilization. "How much farther to the settlement?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 2 days, maybe less," he replied, "if no more trouble." Mary nodded, trying to ignore the pang of sadness that came with the knowledge that their journey was nearing its end. "And then you'll go back to your life, and I to mine." Kuruk didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was low and measured. "Before I found you, I had no life, only survival." He met her gaze across the fire. "You reminded me that there is more." "Then why?" Mary began, but Kuruk raised a hand, his body suddenly tense. "Quiet," he whispered, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "Someone comes." Mary froze, straining to hear whatever had alerted him. For several seconds, there was nothing but the soft crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. Then she heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of a twig snapping, followed by the muffled thud of footsteps approaching through the underbrush. Kuruk moved silently to where the children slept, touching James's shoulder to wake him. The boy came alert instantly, gathering his siblings and moving them toward the deeper shadows, as Kuruk had clearly instructed him to do in such a situation. Mary stood, heart pounding, as Kuruk drew his knife and positioned himself between her family and the approaching threat. She grabbed a heavy branch from their firewood pile, gripping it tightly as a makeshift weapon. The footsteps grew louder, more distinct. Not the cautious approach of bandits, Mary realized, but the deliberate stride of someone who wasn't attempting to conceal their presence. A figure emerged from the darkness at the edge of their camp, a tall Apache warrior adorned with paint and feathers that marked him as someone of importance. Behind him, 5 more warriors appeared, each armed with bows or rifles taken from the white man. Kuruk stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the newcomers and Mary's family. He spoke in rapid Apache, his voice calm but firm. The lead warrior responded, his eyes moving from Kuruk to Mary and the children, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The exchange continued for several tense moments, occasionally rising in volume as both men seemed to grow more insistent. Mary couldn't understand the words, but the mounting tension was unmistakable. Finally, the lead warrior made a sharp gesture with his hand, and the others lowered their weapons slightly. He spoke again, more slowly this time. his eyes never leaving Kuruk's face. Kuruk responded with a single word that seemed to carry great weight. Then, to Mary's shock, he removed the beaded necklace he always wore and held it out to the other man. The warrior took it, examined it closely, then nodded with new respect in his bearing. He returned the necklace to Kuruk and spoke once more before turning to leave, his men following without question. As they melted back into the darkness, Mary released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What did you say to them?" Kuruk returned to the fire, his face grave but relieved. "They are from my mother's clan. The leader is my cousin, Stone Bear." He tucked the necklace back beneath his shirt. "They hunt the same bandits who follow us." "Why? What have the bandits done to them?" "Killed 2 Apache children near their camp 3 days ago." Kuruk's voice hardened. "The bandits mistook them for Comanche." Mary felt ill at the revelation. "Did you tell them to help us?" "I told them our story, that you and your children deserve protection." Kuruk poked at the dying fire. "They agreed to deal with the bandits." Relief flooded through Mary, followed quickly by concern at Kuruk's continued gravity. "Isn't that good news?" "Yes," he admitted, "but they asked why an Apache warrior travels with a white woman and her children." His eyes met hers, conflicted and sorrowful. "I told them the truth, which is..." "Shh," Mary whispered, though she already knew, "that I have pledged to see you safely to your people." He looked away. "And that my heart travels a path it cannot follow." Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost cruel, the sky a perfect cloudless blue that promised nothing but heat as the day progressed. Mary woke to find James already up, sitting beside Kuruk at the edge of their camp, as the Apache warrior showed him how to fashion a small hunting bow from a flexible branch. Emma and William still slept, their faces peaceful in a way Mary hadn't seen since before the bandits attacked. The knowledge that those men would never threaten her family again brought both relief and a disquieting awareness of what such dealing with likely entailed. She pushed the thought aside, unwilling to examine too closely the justice of a harsh land. "How long until we reach the settlement?" James was asking as Mary approached. "If we maintain good pace, by tomorrow evening," Kuruk replied, testing the tension in the makeshift bowstring. "Terrain grows easier from here, more traveled." Mary noticed the slight strain in his voice, the careful way he avoided looking at her. His confession the previous night hung between them like an invisible barrier, the acknowledgement of feelings that could exist but not flourish. "Will you stay with us when we get there?" James asked, the question Mary herself had been afraid to voice. Kuruk's hands stilled. "No, James, I cannot." "But why?" The boy's face fell. "You could teach me more things. Help us build a proper house." Kuruk placed a hand on James's shoulder, his expression gentle but resolute. "Your people and mine do not mix well. My presence would bring trouble for your mother, for all of you." James scowled, looking so much like his father in that moment that Mary's heart ached. "That's stupid," he declared with a child's straightforward assessment. "You saved us. You're good." "The world is not always wise, young one." Kuruk glanced at Mary, something unspoken passing between them. "Sometimes we must accept what is, even when we wish for what could be." They broke camp shortly afterward, continuing their journey with the knowledge that each step brought them closer to parting. The terrain, as Kuruk had predicted, grew more welcoming, the steep mountain slopes giving way to rolling foothills covered in scrub and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. A proper trail appeared, rutted from wagon wheels and horse traffic. "People come this way often now," Kuruk explained, indicating the well-worn path, "to settlement, to mines." "Will it be dangerous for you to travel so close to white settlements?" Mary asked, concerned. "I stay hidden." He touched his knife briefly. "Always." They stopped at midday near a small spring, the children laughing as they splashed in its cool waters. Mary found herself memorizing every detail of this moment. The sound of William's delighted giggle, the careful way Kuruk showed Emma how to cup her hands to drink, the sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead. Tomorrow, this brief interlude in their lives would end, and the world, with all its rigid boundaries, would reclaim them. As they prepared to continue, Mary noticed Kuruk growing increasingly alert, his gaze sweeping the horizon with heightened vigilance. "What is it?" she asked quietly, not wanting to alarm the children. "Smoke." He nodded toward the east, where a thin grey column rose in the distance. Not Apache, not bandits. His expression darkened. Army patrol, perhaps. The possibility sent ice through Mary's veins. If soldiers found them with Kuruk, they might shoot first and ask questions later. Even if she explained his role in their salvation, military men were known for their particular hatred of Apache scouts who operated independently. "We should avoid them," she suggested, but Kuruk shook his head. "Trail narrows ahead, valley walls steep, no other path to settlement." He considered their options. "I go separate, circle around, meet you beyond ridge." "No." The word escaped before Mary could stop it, sharp with sudden fear. "We stay together." Kuruk looked at her, his eyes softening briefly. "Too dangerous, Mary, for all." "I won't let them hurt you," she insisted, though they both knew how powerless she would be if soldiers decided Kuruk was a threat. "Mama?" Emma tugged at her skirt, her small face concerned. "Why are you arguing with Mr. Kuruk?" Mary knelt, smoothing her daughter's hair. "We're not arguing, sweetheart. We're just trying to decide the safest way forward." James approached, his young face serious. "Is it soldiers, Mr. Kuruk?" The Apache nodded, impressed by the boy's perception. "Maybe. If so, better I travel alone." "But you'll find us again?" William asked anxiously, clinging to Mary's skirts. "You promised you wouldn't leave us." Kuruk crouched to the boy's level. "I promised to see you safely to settlement. Tomorrow." That promise fulfilled. "That's not what I meant." William's voice rose, tears threatening. "You can't go away forever. He struggled for words. "You're part of us now." The simple declaration hung in the air, a child's uncomplicated truth laid bare. Mary saw Kuruk's composure falter, genuine emotion flickering across his normally guarded features. Before he could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Kuruk immediately pulled them all into the cover of a thick juniper grove. "Riders coming," he whispered. "Many. Stay silent." They crouched together as the hoofbeats grew louder. Through gaps in the foliage, Mary could make out a column of cavalry approaching along the trail, at least a dozen soldiers in blue uniforms, rifles ready, eyes scanning the surrounding terrain with practiced vigilance. Kuruk pressed deeper into the shadows, his body tense as a drawn bow. Mary instinctively placed herself between him and the trail, the children huddled behind them both. The patrol was nearly past their hiding place when disaster struck. Emma, trying to see better, dislodged a loose stone that clattered down the slight embankment toward the trail. The noise, insignificant in normal circumstances, seemed deafening in the tense silence. "Hold!" the patrol leader commanded, raising his hand. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Mary's eyes met Kuruk's in a moment of shared panic. She made a split-second decision. "Stay hidden," she whispered to him. "I'll go. I'll tell them I'm a widow traveling to the settlement with my children. They'll escort us the rest of the way." "They will search area," Kuruk warned, his voice barely audible. "Find me." "No, they won't, because you won't be here." She gripped his arm. "Circle around as you planned. Meet us at the settlement tomorrow night, the eastern edge." He shook his head. "Too dangerous." "Please," Mary implored, "just one more day to say goodbye properly." Something in her voice must have conveyed the depth of her need, for Kuruk finally nodded, though reluctance was written in every line of his body. "One day," he agreed, "eastern edge, After sunset. "I know you're in there," the soldier called again, more forcefully. "Come out now or we'll come in shooting." "Go," Mary whispered to Kuruk. He hesitated, then pressed something into her hand, the small wooden wolf he had carved for James days earlier. "Remember," he said simply, then melted into the undergrowth with silent grace. Mary took a deep breath, then stood, pushing the children protectively behind her. "Don't shoot!" she called, stepping out of the junipers with her hands raised. "I'm Mary Henderson, a widow. These are my children. We're trying to reach the settlement." The patrol leader, a weathered lieutenant with a thick mustache, regarded her with suspicion. "Ma'am, what are you doing out here alone? These hills aren't safe for unaccompanied women and children." "Our wagon was attacked by bandits several days ago," she explained, maintaining a calm she didn't feel. "We've been walking ever since." The lieutenant frowned. "And you've survived how exactly?" Mary had prepared for this question. "God's providence, sir. We found an abandoned miner's cabin with some provisions, and I know which plants can be eaten safely." The soldier's expression remained doubtful, but he motioned to his men. "Rawlins, Jackson, search those bushes. The rest of you, spread out, check the area." Mary's heart hammered as the soldiers dismounted and began searching, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir, my children are exhausted and hungry. If your men could spare any food." The diversionary tactic worked. The lieutenant's face softened slightly as he looked at the three tired children. "Of course, ma'am. We have rations to share." He turned to one of his men. "Peterson, get these youngsters something to eat." As the soldiers searched, finding nothing thanks to Kuruk's skill at disappearing, Mary and the children accepted hardtack and dried beef from the patrol's supplies. The lieutenant, who introduced himself as Lieutenant Marshal, informed them that the settlement was indeed just a day's journey away. "We'll escort you there, Mrs. Henderson," he declared. "Can't have you wandering these hills alone. Apache war parties have been spotted recently." "That's very kind," Mary replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We're grateful for the protection." As the soldiers prepared to continue, lifting Emma and William onto their horses, while James was given a mount of his own, Mary cast one final glance back at the juniper grove. There was no sign of Kuruk, but she knew he was watching. Tomorrow night, at the eastern edge of the settlement, one last chance to say what needed to be said, one final opportunity to acknowledge what had grown between them before the world's realities forced them apart forever. She clutched the wooden wolf in her pocket, its smooth contours a tangible reminder of the man who had saved not just their lives, but something deeper, their faith in humanity's capacity for kindness across the boundaries of race and history. As the patrol moved out, Mary riding double with a young corporal, she sent a silent prayer into the vast blue sky. Let him be safe. Let us meet once more. And perhaps, though she barely dared to think it, let there be a way forward that we cannot yet see. The settlement of River Bend emerged from the dusty landscape like a mirage, a collection of wooden structures straddling both sides of a modest river, connected by a sturdy bridge that gave the town its name. As Lieutenant Marshall's patrol escorted them down the main street, Mary observed the trappings of civilization with mixed emotions. After days in the wilderness with Kuruk, the sight of painted storefronts, hitching posts, and women in proper dresses seemed somehow foreign. "The parson's wife will see to you and the children," Lieutenant Marshall announced, reining in before a white clapboard church. "Reverend Simmons runs a relief program for settlers in distress." Mary thanked him automatically, her mind already calculating how she would slip away after nightfall to meet Kuruk. As the lieutenant helped her down from the horse, he added in a lower voice, "Ma'am, if I might ask, you're certain you encountered no Indians during your ordeal?" She met his gaze steadily. As I told you, Lieutenant, we were fortunate enough to avoid such encounters. The lie felt like a prayer, protection for the man who had saved them. The Reverend's wife, Mrs. Simmons, was a plump, efficient woman who clucked sympathetically over Mary's ragged appearance and the children's sunburned faces. She installed them in a small room behind the church, brought clean clothes and hot food, and promised to help Mary find employment once she was back on her feet. Such terrible fortune, losing your husband and then being set upon by bandits, Mrs. Simmons sighed. But God works in mysterious ways. Those same bandits were found dead just yesterday, killed by Apaches, the patrol said. Savages killing savages, if you ask me. Mary bit her tongue, focusing instead on braiding Emma's freshly washed hair. We're grateful for your hospitality, she said carefully, and for God's providence. As night approached, Mary's anxiety grew. The children sensed her restlessness, exchanging knowing glances. After Mrs. Simmons departed for the evening, leaving them with strict instructions to bolt the door, James approached his mother. "You're going to meet him, aren't you?" he asked without preamble. Mary hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we're coming too," James declared, his siblings nodding in agreement. Mary considered arguing, but the determination in their young faces stopped her. They had all been through too much together. "All right," she conceded, "but you must be absolutely silent. If anyone sees us..." When the town finally quieted and darkness provided adequate cover, Mary led her children through River Bend's sleeping streets toward its eastern boundary. Beyond the last building, the land opened up to scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. They waited in the shadow of an abandoned shed, watching, listening. "Do you think he'll come, Mama?" Emma whispered, her small hand warm in Mary's. "He promised," William answered before Mary could, his childish faith unwavering. A whisper of sound, barely perceptible, made them turn. Kuruk stood just yards away, his silhouette distinctive against the star-filled sky. He approached slowly, caution evident in every movement. Mary's heart lurched at the sight of him. One day apart had felt like an eternity. "You came," she breathed. "I promised," he replied, echoing William's words. His eyes swept over them, noting their clean clothes and rested appearance. "Settlement treats you well." "Yes, but," Mary began, then faltered, unsure how to articulate the emptiness she felt despite their physical comfort. The children had no such hesitation. Emma ran forward, wrapping her arms around Kuruk's waist. William followed suit. After a moment, even James stepped forward, extending his hand, as he'd seen men do. Kuruk clasped it solemnly, then placed his other hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are brave, James Henderson," he said. "A worthy son, a worthy brother." "You could stay," James suggested, hope transparent in his young voice. "People might not like it at first, but they'd see you're good, like we did." Kuruk's expression softened. "The world is not ready, young one." Mary stepped closer, the children instinctively giving them space. "But what if there was another way?" she asked, a plan she'd been formulating all day finally taking shape. "Not here, but elsewhere." Kuruk tilted his head, waiting. "I heard people talking today about a place called Peaceful Valley," Mary continued. "A settlement to the north where Indians and whites live together. Former soldiers, missionaries, people from different tribes. They say it's difficult, not always harmonious, but possible." "Many such places fail," Kuruk observed, though she detected a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Many do," Mary acknowledged, "but some don't." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions, with hope and doubt intertwined. "It would not be easy path," Kuruk finally said, his voice low. "No," Mary agreed, "but I'm tired of easy paths that lead nowhere." She took his hand, her fingers entwining with his. "We could try, together." Kuruk looked down at their joined hands, then at the children watching them with hopeful eyes. Together, he repeated, the word both question and answer. In that moment, under the vast canopy of stars, something new and fragile took root, not a promise of perfect happiness, but of possibility, of a journey that might lead to a place where love could grow across the boundaries others had drawn. Mary stepped forward, resting her head against Kuruk's chest. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, a rhythm that matched her own. "I was dead inside before I found you," she whispered. "You gave us life again." Kuruk's arms encircled her, his embrace gentle yet fierce. "And you gave me reason to live, not merely survive." The children moved closer, forming a circle around them. A family forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice, by courage, by love that refused to acknowledge the limitations others would impose upon it. "Peaceful Valley," Kuruk said thoughtfully. "How far?" 10 days' journey, Mary replied. "But we have food now, supplies and knowledge." She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her face. "You taught us well." His smile, rare and transformative, changed his entire countenance. "Then we leave tomorrow, before dawn." William tugged at Kuruk's hand. "Will there be other children there?" "Yes," Kuruk answered, though he couldn't possibly know for certain. "And you will teach them what you have learned, that courage wears many faces, that family is found, not only born." As they stood together, beneath the endless sky, Mary understood that their journey was just beginning. The path ahead would be neither simple nor guaranteed, but they would walk it together, each step an act of defiance against a world that insisted some divides could never be crossed. Sometimes, she reflected, as Kuruk's arm tightened around her shoulders, the greatest journeys begin with the simplest of acts, a desperate plea, an unexpected kindness, a heart open enough to recognize that love speaks in a language all its own. For Mary Henderson and Kuruk, that journey had begun with 7 words spoken in the dust of an abandoned town. "I'll be yours forever, if you feed them." Words offered in desperation, answered with compassion, and transformed against all odds into a promise that now stretched before them like the endless horizon, luminous with possibility, radiant with hope.